welcome to another webinar by REACHLaw. This is the first webinar of 2026. And today we are going to have a special Q&A webinar, Ukraine REACH, Ukraine CLP, and the law on chemical safety, so LCS. So this webinar will indeed be based on questions that you have been submitting as part of the registration process. And we can also try and take some live questions, but I'll come back to that in just a few seconds. So indeed, we have two presenters, experts here today. So Olesia, do you want to present yourself, please?
Yes, thank you, Frederik. Hello, everyone. My name is Olesia Vinterberg. I'm working as a global accounts lead and legal advisor at REACHLaw. I've been with the company since 2010, worked with many, well, maybe all the REACHs out there. And at the moment, I'm heavily focused on Ukraine REACH, and in this capacity, I'm in this webinar. My background is international law and also international business, and within REACHLaw, I work with our global accounts. And at the moment, I said particular focused on Ukraine REACH, CLP and LCS requirements. Thank you.
Thank you, Olesia. And I'm Frederik Johanson. I'm a partner, head of sales here at REACHLaw, a chemical engineer by background, also working obviously with Ukraine REACH, but all the other REACHs also. And yeah, been active for more than 20 years. But time flies when you're having fun, I guess. But happy to be in this webinar and go through your questions. So indeed, you submitted questions as part of the registration process. We got a lot of questions. So what we've done is we've consolidated those into similar type of questions. So if you can't see your question word for word, then rest assured that it's likely been consolidated into similar type of questions. But indeed, you can also use this question Q&A function, question function in this new interface by GoToWebinar. So if you go up here, you can type in a question and we'll do our best to answer those during the webinar. So indeed, we will start with the pre-submitted questions and then go to the live ones, time permitting. And as per usual, I think once like 1 hour, 60 minutes will probably not be enough time for this. But in any case, if you have to leave early or are just looking at this on our YouTube channel, then you already know that this will be uploaded to our YouTube channel called REACHLaw Talks within a couple of days. So you can find us there. And of course, feel free to send us feedback. We would appreciate that very much. And of course, also, if you have new ideas for webinar topics, chemical product related topics, chemical regulatory product regulatory related topics, feel free to send them to us and we'll have a look. That would be interesting to see what the requests are from the audience. But today, indeed, it's Ukraine REACH, CLP and law on chemical safety Q&A webinar. And maybe just to preface this webinar, we will not have a lot of slides. Actually, we have very, very few slides because we are taking these questions and answering them verbally. We have a few slides strategically dropped in here and there, but other than that, it's verbally only, mostly at least. But we'll start with the agenda today, just having a quick recap of who we are at REACHLaw, so REACHLaw in brief. Then I'll hand over to Olesia. She will go through the Ukraine's new chemical legislation, so the hierarchy, if you will, so you understand how all these different laws and regulations are pitted against each other, if you will. And then we go to these pre-submitted questions. I think we have almost like 40 plus questions on that. Many are very similar, so we may just, in the interest of saving time, say that this has already been answered, but nonetheless. And then we'll round up with some live questions that have not been answered in this webinar. So if you have burning sense or urgency to submit the question, please go ahead and do so, or you can wait for a bit later on to see whether your question has already been answered. And at the end, of course, you will find our contact details. So indeed, 1 hour we'll try, but likely we'll go slightly over, as is the usual with our webinars. So indeed, REACHLaw, who are we? Just a brief recap. So we provide support for REACH and REACH-like chemical regulations and product regulations globally. So we have offices in several countries where we have these REACH-like regulations in place, and additional countries where actually we don't yet have a REACH type of a regulation in place. So of course, I'm calling in from the head office here in Helsinki, Finland, where we support clients with EU REACH and EU-CLP and other EU regulations also. I won't go into those details. Then we have an office in Manchester in the UK for UK REACH and GB-CLP related support, and also providing obviously only representative supports in these jurisdictions. Then in Istanbul, obviously, we have an office for KKD-IK purposes. So I've had several, and we've had several webinars as of late on the developments there. So go to our YouTube channel to watch those if you missed them. Then Korea and Seoul, we have an office for K-REACH, K-OSHA purposes, and India doesn't have a chemical regulations per se, like a REACH-like chemical regulation, but there we service local clients and other regulations such as the India BIS, which I will not go through here. And then of course in Kyiv in Ukraine for Ukraine REACH, CLP and these LCS related support topics. And in India, indeed, we do have 2 offices, as you can see. And yeah, we do not have an office in Italy for some reason. There is a artifact there. Sorry for that typo. Well, not yet at least. Anyway, so what we do, overview of our services. So we have essentially 3 business areas, out of which, of course, compliance is the biggest ones, where we're talking about chemical regulatory compliance, as, for example, the topic of today, Ukraine REACH, CLP and law on chemical safety. In these, of course, we provide only representative services, but as part of this segment of services, we also provide support for product-related compliance topics. I won't go into the details here, and advocacy for companies needing to help get their message through to the authorities to maybe affect legal developments, etc. And sustainability, which is of course everything, if you will, comes back to sustainability. But we'll focus today on the compliance part, and more specifically chemical compliance, and of course Ukraine REACH, CLP and law on chemical safety. So indeed, as mentioned, we are a big only representative for companies that are wanting to place chemicals, for example, on the Ukrainian market, but also these other jurisdictions where we work with REACH-like chemical regulations. But indeed, today we are going to talk about Ukraine REACH. And as mentioned, we have our YouTube channel that has, I think at the moment, we have 164 videos. Not all of them are webinars. Some of them are short forms, snippets, cutouts from webinar material, but you will also find our full webinar streams uncut on YouTube, so you can have a look at them at your leisure. And also some specific podcast content, etc. So head over to REACHLaw Talks on YouTube, and if you like it, you can subscribe and give a thumbs up. So indeed, a lot of material there for your viewing pleasure, if you can call it that, and knock yourself out, as I would say, maybe physically. Anyway, disclaimer, copyright. So indeed, this content in this presentation is of course for general purposes only, as well as our answers to your questions. So it's not, you should not construe it as consultancy per se. If you need specific help, please feel free to contact us directly, and we can provide you with the appropriate support on that. And Olesia, if she wants to, as a lawyer, provide more information on disclaimers and copyrights, she can do so. But for me, this is enough, and I think for you also, the viewers. So indeed, Olesia, I will hand over to you, and I will also just cut off the video feed just to save a bit of bandwidth for our colleagues around the world. So go ahead, Olesia.
Thank you, Frederik. So let's move on to the practical side of this presentation. So the basis for today's discussion, just to start, would be the new Ukraine's chemical legislation, and the answers to your questions that you have pre-submitted for this webinar will be based on this many different laws, regulations, resolutions, and implementations procedures. So let's start from the beginning. First of all, the most important change in the chemical legislation in Ukraine was the approval and entry into force of the law on chemical safety. This is a legislation that sets the basis for technical regulations, which are they called like technical regulations in Ukraine, Ukraine REACH and Ukraine CLP. So the law on chemical safety, which we will often refer to as LCS, entered into force on the 29th of June 2024, and then it laid foundation to the Ukraine REACH and Ukraine CLP. So Ukraine CLP entered into force first. It was 15th of November 2024, and Ukraine REACH on the 26th of January 2025. Both of these technical regulations, Ukraine REACH and Ukraine CLP, were approved by the resolutions, so resolutions on approval. And in many cases, most of the transitional provisions for each of these regulations are actually stipulated in the resolutions on approval. In the law on chemical safety, we have multiple implementation procedures already approved by the government, and more of them are still coming. And quite recently, just before the new year, there was another resolution, number 1598, which amended both resolutions on approval of Ukraine REACH and Ukraine CLP. So this resolution introduced even more changes and transitional provisions for previously adopted transitional provisions for both Ukraine REACH and CLP. So you can see it's quite a complicated structure, and to interpret the legislation in Ukraine for Ukraine REACH and Ukraine CLP, you have to look at all of these laws, regulations, resolutions, and implementations procedures together, so not in isolation. So when we answer your questions today, we will provide the answers based on this legislation system. And we will often refer to the new resolution, and the new resolution, we mean this recent one from December 5th, 2025, which amended the resolutions approving both technical regulations and provided further extensions to certain deadlines. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Olesia. That was like an overview of the legislative hierarchy, and now let's go into the pre-submitted questions. So first of all, of course, thank you to everyone who submitted questions. We appreciate that very much. We also learn a lot in the process, so happy to receive a lot of questions. So indeed, what I've done here is I've included these questions in the slides. We'll go down the list one by one, and as I said, some of them have been slightly modified and consolidated, and if there were similar type of questions, we just skip the other ones. So if you don't see your questions word for word, verbatim, so to speak, know that they're somehow merged into similar type of question. So Olesia, are you ready? We have a lot of
Yes.
Indeed, 7 pages plus additional slides supporting some of the questions to go through here, plus then the live later on. So let's start with the first question in no particular order, except to save the questions on law and chemical safety last. So question number 1. I understand that the pre-registration deadline was postponed 1 year. Is that correct? And yes, that is absolutely correct. So now the pre-registration deadline is indeed 26th of January 2027. So not yesterday. Otherwise, it would have been yesterday. So 26th of January 26. But it was indeed postponed with these new resolutions. So that indeed you have 1 year for more or less from today to get this work done. So that was an easy question. Well, it gets harder as we go along the list, so to speak. So have companies already gotten back from the authority with regards to CLP notifications? So I'll let you, Olesia, take this one.
Yes, so quite many CNL notifications were submitted to the previous authority, which was the Ministry of Environment, MEPR. And during the transition period, if you have submitted your CNL notifications to the previous authority and the previous email, and you haven't received a response, likely they were not transferred to the new authority. So this has happened to us as well. So we have submitted in some cases the new CNL notification. So if you haven't received any feedback from the new authority, just go ahead and resubmit just to be sure. And the normal response for the CNL notification would be not the assignment on some sort of number, but just an email with the acceptance or rejection. We haven't received rejections ever, but I would assume that if they're not accepted, that would be a rejection. So to be sure that you have your CNL notifications were indeed accepted, you need to receive a response from the ministry. So if you haven't received one, just go ahead and resubmit, even though it might be inconvenience, but just go ahead and do that. Thanks.
Very, very good. Thank you, Olesia. And maybe just to add a few comments on this. So indeed, in the spirit of the first question, so the deadline for CLP notifications was also postponed from 15th of November 25 until 6th of December this year. So just to add that here in the spirit of postponements. So next, third question, what is needed for Ukraine REACH compliance? Please provide an overview. So this is obviously, I'll start here, Olesia, and you can then add more information to my answer. But of course, this is a very wide topic. We have our other webinars on the topic and that are available on YouTube, on REACHLaw Talks. So I invite you to have a look at those. But just to quickly run through this. So obviously you need to start with checking what chemicals you are placing on, for example, the Ukrainian market. You first need to determine where you're located. You know this already. Are you outside of Ukraine or inside? Let's assume you are outside, which I think most of you attending this webinar are. So then, of course, you yourself do not have any legal obligations to make sure your chemicals placed on the Ukrainian market are compliant. It's actually the requirement of Ukrainian-based companies, either then importing this substance or manufacturing the substance. But if you are a non-Ukrainian company and you are a manufacturer or a formulator, so you include this substance in a mixture or manufacture it yourself, then of course you can also appoint an only representative under Ukraine REACH. And this only representative then first takes care of the pre-registration requirement for your substances that placed on the Ukrainian market at 1 ton or more, albeit we recommend that if you are close to the 1 ton threshold, below it, then just out of abundance of caution, just go ahead and pre-register. And then for the time being, this is the only thing you need to do. Eventually, then we'll see how things pan out with the actual registration process. You would then need to, depending on the type and hazards of the substance and the volume, annual volume of the substance, you would then need to either register by 1st of October 28. This is for CMR substances at 1 ton or more, substances very toxic to aquatic organisms at 100 tons or more annually. And then, of course, if you have substances that are over 1,000 tons but are not these CMRs and these very toxic to aquatic organism substances, then your deadline would be 1st of October 29. And then subsequently, the deadline for 100 to 1,000 tons would be 1st of June 2031. And then the last one, 1 to 10, 10 to 100 tons annually would be 1st of March 2033. The old one was 30. So indeed, the deadlines are 28, 29, 31, and 33. I don't have a slide on this, so you just have to take it verbally. But you can find it on our previous recording, albeit there the final resolution was not clear enough that we could say that the CLP notification deadline was 6th of December 2026, which it is. That's the only thing that's not up to date in those old webinar recordings. Okay, a long-winded discussion, answer here. Olesia, do you have anything to add? Did I miss something?
No, you haven't missed anything, I think, but I just want to mention that it's important to remember that REACH is a very complicated piece of legislation, and the authority and the team is almost newly formed. And at the moment, the focus of the authority, it seems to be that it's in terms of Ukraine REACH is the pre-registration, and in terms of Ukraine CLP is CNL notification. So these two activities and requirements are the focus of the authority and should be also the focus of the industry. I'm pretty sure we will learn certain discrepancies between the EU counterparts of these regulations and the Ukraine regulations as we go along the way, and the journey will be long. But for the moment, we just recommend you to focus on the pre-registrations, CNL notifications, and pre-registrations. Obviously, if you're a non-Ukrainian company, you would likely need an only representative. So that's maybe that Frederik already mentioned the process for setup on the representation. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for that valuable comment. And indeed, focus on, for now, on pre-registration and CLP notification, and we'll worry about the rest later on. I know there are questions on the upcoming registration process and so forth. We'll tackle those separately. And actually, it comes here already in the next question. So where to find more practical information, guidance on Ukraine REACH and the CLP? Is there like a governmental website? Is Ukraine planning to implement the IT portal for submissions, or will they continue to rely on Excel file format submissions? Do you have any lessons learned to be shared so far? I'll let you, Olesia, start this one. I can complement if needed.
Yes, thank you. So for the information, I would recommend to follow REACHLaw, honestly, because we try to follow all the relevant sources. But I mean, if you want the materials from the source, it would be the ministry website, which is the new ministry website. It's me.gov.ua. However, it's not that easy to use it, and for those who have tried to find information from the previous authority, which was MEPR, it was not easy either. They were publishing news on different parts of their website, and it wasn't very easy even for us experts in the area. But I would recommend to subscribe to REACHLaw newsletter. We usually very quickly update the industry and our subscribers on all the recent developments, and if there are any changes or there are any new interpretations or findings for these specific topics and any other topics in the area of our expertise. So this will be that. And for the guidances, well, the thing is that the Ukrainian authority, it won't work in the same way as ECHA did. So you shouldn't expect that many guidances as ECHA has. I know for all of us, ECHA guidances are, for example, very useful. You can find quite a lot of information there on the practical implementation of this and that. Unfortunately, that won't be the case for the Ukrainian authority. First of all, it's not the way how the Ukrainian authorities work in general, and also they don't have enough resources either. So you could expect some implementation recommendations for certain specific requirements, but they won't be in the same format as guidances by ECHA are. For example, and we will talk a little bit more about this, there was a sort of a guidance, rules on joint submission that previous authority has prepared in June last year. And you have to understand that this sort of guidance, it has to be also approved by the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, or I mean, anyways, it has to be approved further. So it's a very tedious process to approve any sort of guidance for the Ukrainian authority. You can also contact authority by sending them an official letter to the official email of the ministry. Remember to sign it electronically, and then the ministry is supposed to respond to you, but also expect the response to be within the lines of the regulation itself. So likely you're not getting anything more than is already written in the regulation in most cases, and it was at least our experience. For the submissions of the pre-registrations and CNL notifications, it is very unlikely that the Excel files will be changed to some sort of portal submissions. Likely the process will continue with the Excel files. For the registration, if it happens, the IT tool was planned, of course, and likely it will be implemented through the DIA, which is the online portal in Ukraine for various activities. For example, also used for the electronic signature on the documents. However, to our knowledge, there is no work currently ongoing for the portal or submission tool. It can change, of course, but as said, at the moment, the authority's priority is registration and CNL notification. Therefore, it's very unlikely that the priorities will change anytime soon before the deadline for both of these requirements. And for the lessons learned so far, what we understood is the pre-registration is much more complicated in Ukraine than it was in the EU, absolutely much more complicated because you have to provide the compositional information. The CNL notification is not an easy requirement either. So when at least we work, of course, we don't submit our own information, we submit information from the customers. So even though you might think it's an easy type of submission, there is a lot of communication ongoing between the customer and the owner representative, and a lot of information needs to be collected and checked. Therefore, we recommend here to not to postpone the pre-registration or send a notification to the last moment because you won't be able to submit it on time. It's not as easy, it's not one click or two click type of requirement. That would be maybe from my side the lessons learned. Frederik, do you want to comment further?
Very, very thorough answer. I have nothing else to say. That indeed be mindful that this pre-registration under Ukraine REACH is indeed much more complex than other regulations like EU REACH back in the day, or Turkey, or even K-REACH. So it's actually more of like a mini inquiry than a pre-registration. So if you're thinking about like workload, consider it from like an inquiry perspective. If you've done EU REACH inquiries, then it's more like that versus actually a pre-registration, albeit it is of course called a pre-registration under Ukraine REACH. So indeed, just to be mindful of the workload, because it's much more than your average pre-registrations like we had back in the day under EU REACH. That's it. Thank you. The next question goes to you also, Olesia. Is there an SVH list under Ukraine REACH?
To our understanding, at the moment, there is no SVHC list under Ukraine REACH, but according to the Article 260 of the Ukraine REACH, the authority must form the list of the substances of the very high concern, which is the SVHC list, and the list of the toxic chemicals, and we will come to the toxic chemicals separately. So these two inventories or lists are supposed to be formed by the authority, but likely, and to our current understanding, those lists will be formed after the CNL notification deadline, because this is when the authority will get the information from the industry, the substances that are on the market in Ukraine and their classifications. So let's not wait for this list now. Probably it will come a little bit later. The CLP notification deadline is the 6th of December 2026, so this year. So I would assume that that SPHC list can be published sometimes after that date. But then again, there is no deadline or the process stipulated in the regulation. Therefore, the authority can interpret this up to their convenience. I hope this is a good answer.
Yes, thank you, Olesia. I have nothing to add to that. Next question, numbering seems to be a bit off, but still, how can we determine which companies in the agrochemical or other industries need to pre-register registered chemical substances? Well, I assume this is like a basic scope-related question. So, of course, you need to check your tonnages. If it's less than 1 ton, then of course you don't have to register or pre-register under Ukraine REACH. Or if it is over, then you need to assess, does it fall into the scope of the registration requirement, which I would say out of 99.9% of the cases it does. So you can ask yourself, is it the same scope? Do those substances require registration under EU REACH? I think you will know EU REACH much better. If it does, then of course it is likely, and it will be required to be pre-registered and registered then under Ukraine REACH also. So you need to go through this exercise of checking the scope, the volumes, and then determine are there maybe some special exemptions for those substances, and then act accordingly. Then there were questions about like who are the leading companies and how to form a consortium. As Olesia already alluded to earlier, even the authorities are now saying to focus on the pre-registration step and the CLP notification step, but eventually, obviously, as we get closer to the registration deadlines, there will be some procedures for selecting a lead registrant, or one company can nominate themselves as a lead, and then the other ones need to likely have some sort of a voting majority accepting that company as a lead registrant, and then it can go forward and then take care of the lead registration duties and forming of the joint submission, etc. But as said, those technical capabilities are not there yet, so we'll see how this develops. And of course, rest assured that if you are following us in our webinars and are subscribing to our newsletter, you will be among the first to know what's happening. And how to form a consortium, that's a voluntary, if we're not talking about the consortium and not the SEEF, for example, then consortiums are formed, or consortia are formed between voluntary members of companies using different agreements to set this up. But my recommendation is that if we ever go to a situation where substances need to be registered under Ukraine REACH, then I would highly recommend going forward with the lead registrant driven joint submission and not the heavy consortium approach. But that's just my personal view on this. Do you have anything, Olesia, to add to this?
Yes, just very briefly, there is often we have heard a little bit of confusion in the industry, because in the Ukraine REACH, the SEEFs have been translated as data consortiums. Therefore, it's a little bit confusing for those who worked in the EU REACH and other REACH-like regimes with the actual real consortiums, as Frederik has described, and then SEEFs are a little bit of a separate type of thing. Therefore, when we speak about the consortiums at REACHLaw, we mean the actual consortiums that are voluntary type of agreements or setups. But in Ukraine REACH, the CEFs have been translated to consortiums. Therefore, there might be confusion every now and then. So whenever you discuss with anyone about the Ukraine REACH consortium, please make sure to specify what kind of consortia do you mean, like a simple CEF or like a real consortium type of setup. Just a comment. Thank you.
Very good indeed. Just to make things a bit more complicated and confusing. Good. And next question, I'll take this quickly. So I would appreciate information on where to find relevant forms to submit Ukraine CLP notifications. So indeed, on the screen now, you can see this long-winded URL. It's still on the old MEPR website, but you can download this Excel template from there. And yeah, I will not read it out, but you can find it on the screen. You can take a screenshot and you will find it there. And just be wary that it is macro enabled, so there could be some security pop-ups coming up when you try to enable editing, and it could be that you could not even enable editing or the functioning of these macros in this Excel based on your company security profile, if you will, or like these provisions for using and working with macro enabled files. So check with your IT if you have issues with that. And this next one goes to Olesia as the proverbial PCN expert, Ukraine CLP PCN expert. So can you provide some details about Ukraine CLP PCN registration process? So the PCN registration process, and I guess also just the general status thereof.
Yes, yes, thank you. Okay, so that's again one of those topics under the Ukraine CLP that is not very clear for experts or the industry, or probably even to the authorities. However, I will try to a little bit unfold what do we know at the moment. So the CLP PCN notifications, let's call them just PCN notification or poison center notifications, are done according to the Annex 7 to the CLP regulations. So basically, Annex 7 of the Ukraine CLP is more or less a copy, a translation of the EU CLP Annex 7. So the problem here is that Ukraine PCN CLP notifications, the deadlines are 1st of January 2025. But basically, it's written not that there is a deadline, but you have to comply with the PCN notification starting from 1st of January 2025 for the consumer users, from 1st of January 2026 for the professional one, and from 1st of January 2027 for the industrial users. So as you can see, for the consumer and for the professional users, you're supposed to be compliant with the PCN requirements already. But to submit the PCN notification dossier, you need to generate the UFI number. So to generate this UFI number, you need to have the UFI number generator. The UFI number generator has to be available from the authority website, which is at the moment the Ministry of Economy. This generator is not available. Are you able to use your UFI number from European Union? Likely not, at least not at the moment. We know that there were discussions held between the previous authority, Ministry of Environment, and European Union, in particular with ECHA, about the use of the UFI generator, so that the companies who have already generated the UFI numbers in the European Union were able to use the same numbers in the PCN notifications in Ukraine. However, there are no results of this discussion, to our knowledge at least. There might be, but we just don't know about them. So we have a problem that 2 of the deadlines for the PCN notifications have already passed. I mean, you have to be compliant by now. And then we have the UFI number generator not existent under the ministry website. Additionally, to complicate the situation even more, the PCN dossiers are submitted not to the Ministry of Economy, but to the Ministry of Health in Ukraine. But the procedure, how to form the dossier, has to be stipulated by the current authority, which is Ministry of Economy. So again, the procedure has not been specified any further or any more than it is laid down in the Annex 7 to the Ukraine CLP. And to our knowledge, Ministry of Health doesn't accept the dossiers at the moment because there is no UFI number and there is no procedure. Additionally, according to our knowledge, there are no toxicological centers formed in Ukraine either. So as you can see, there are many problems inside this process as such. And even though we have 2 deadlines that have already passed, we could interpret that with this new resolution that we showed on the slide of the legislation, was it 1598, the requirements of the CLP regulation were extended to 1 more year. So basically, you are allowed to not to comply with the requirements of the CLP regulation for 1 more year. So let's interpret this as if it is also possible to not to comply with the requirements of the PCN submissions. What REACHLaw is currently doing is we are trying to figure out the process with the Ministry of Health and with the Ministry of Economy, and this is done by means of approaching them with multiple official letters. But as said previously, the priority for the authority at the moment is registration and CNL notification. However, it would be at least nice to understand from the authority side, can we interpret that it is still possible for 1 year not to comply with the PCN requirements as well? Because the problem is that in the Ukrainian legislation, normally you cannot postpone something that has already happened. So for example, for the PCN requirements for the consumer use, which has already passed and passed before the new resolution was adopted, extending certain deadlines. So that one is likely not possible to not to comply with. It's a very complicated topic, I understand, and I hope I have provided some clarification on the requirements. And to conclude, we assume and we interpret that we still have 1 year, at least for the PCN notifications for the professional use. And I mean, at the same time, there comes the deadline for the industrial use. And we still have 1 year to verify whether about the procedure as such, about the UFI generator, and about the process of submission to the Ministry of Health. So I guess I have tried at least to answer this very complicated question.
Yeah, and valiantly so, Olesia. Thank you very much. This is, I think, a very exhaustive explanation as far as anyone knows at the moment, including likely the ministry itself. So anyway, we'll, as said, please follow our newsletter. We'll keep you up to date on these developments also. So we need to speed up a bit. So jumping to the next question for Ukraine CLP notification, does it totally mirror the same idea as the EU one? Does it mean that the required substance information for CLP notification would already be available in the safety data sheet by the foreign manufacturer? So I would say, like, for all intents and purposes, from a practical perspective, yes, it mirrors EU CLP, and the notification requirements are essentially the same, or the reasoning behind it. You should be able to find, of course, the this classification and labeling related information, classification information on the safety data sheets. If you don't find it there, you can also check it on the ECACHEM website, which is pretty good when it's working. And but of course, predominantly get this information from your foreign manufacturer if it's not abundantly clear from from the safety data sheet, of course. So I'll just steam on, Olesia. Just feel free to jump in if you have anything to add. So going to next question, the obligation for CLP notification is required only for local manufacturers in Ukraine, or is it mandatory for foreign manufacturers supplying products to Ukrainian market? So indeed, foreign manufacturers do not have any obligations to do anything under Ukrainian law because they're not domiciled in Ukraine. However, all substances that are intended for the Ukrainian market, whether they are manufactured or imported, which would be the case for your substances coming into Ukraine, it means that the importer would have then to do this CLP notification. It is possible, and I think we had a similar question coming up, that you assign, for example, any company in Ukraine, it could be your only representative if you have it for Ukraine REACH purposes, to submit a group notification for these substances and include, or this substance, one substance, let's take that as an example, and include the importers or the other importers that are, for example, covered by the OR in this group notification. So essentially, that way you could have your consulting company not in the role of an only representative, but as a group notifier in Ukraine to take care of the CLP notifications on behalf of your customers in Ukraine as importers. So this is the same process that we had, for example, for EU CLP notifications, where, well, still is, but more so back in the day, and for example under Turkey, the CR regulations, so the local CLP notification requirement there, where you have the same type of group notification type of a system in place, or possibility to do it. It's not only representation, it's merely having a consulting company in Ukraine coordinating this effort of submitting a group notification, including several companies. So indeed, not just manufacturers, but importers also. And I would like to have, next question, I would like to have an overview, as we might need Ukraine REACH registration and a comparison with EU REACH. So your wish is my command. And here you will find one of those few slides that we have, a comparison table between EU REACH and Ukraine REACH. So indeed, I will just go through this very quickly. So only representative appointment, yes, so under EU REACH that's possible, and the same applies also under Ukraine REACH. No, you don't need to ask any approval from authorities like under K-REACH, for example. It is essentially the same as under EU REACH. Have an appointment, you make the necessary appointment letters, etc., and then you have an OR for your substances. Pre-registration, obviously not possible anymore in EU, we know, but all substances on the Ukrainian market that are placed on the Ukrainian market at 1 ton or more should be pre-registered, and the late pre-registration will also be possible later on. And indeed, this full compositional information is needed, and this is the difficult issue with pre-registrations under Ukraine REACH. Registration requirements are the same. You can say that the exemptions are the same. There are some very small deviations, but for all intents and purposes, you could say that they are the same. Polymer registration, yeah, both under EU REACH and Ukraine REACH, there is no such requirement. Only the monomers need to be registered. Of course, under REACH review, we are talking about these substances that polymer substances requiring registration, but that's something that is still pending, has been pending for a long time, so we'll see how that pans out. Exemption for registration, self-declarations only. So what that means is that if you think you are exempt, then you should just document it and keep this documentation for yourself. And this same approach applies in Ukraine REACH. Whilst, for example, on the K-REACH, you need to seek an exemption in certain cases. Registration data requirements, yes, higher volumes, higher data requirements. Eventually, when we get there, if we get there, under Ukraine REACH, they also have this simplified registration process but that has a lot of holes in it. We will not dive into it here, but that's something that's deviating a bit from the EU REACH part in the sense of data requirements, joint registration, R&D exemptions, no product notifications per se, toxic substance category definition. This is very unique to Ukraine. We'll talk about this later. So this is indeed specific under the law on chemical safety that we have this additional requirement for certain toxic chemical substances requiring this permit, but it's not under Ukraine REACH per se, albeit it's defined under Ukraine REACH. Safety data sheets the same, no certification requirements, and no dossier reviews required by certified persons like we have for Turkey, for example. So it is in these respects, it is very similar to EU REACH indeed. But if you, and as Olesia knows well, the more you dig into it, you will find these discrepancies, especially when it comes to the registration process and more, which makes it quite tedious and difficult to sometimes interpret. But as said, we are focusing on pre-registrations now. We'll deal with the consequences of registration later on. Olesia, I think you, if you have anything to add, please do so. If not, we will just soldier on. So indeed, page 3, so question 14. So what is the awareness of manufacturers, importers for Ukraine REACH? We still don't get many questions about the compliance. So it really depends upon, I can briefly answer this. So it depends on if you are on the market in Ukraine, and if you are used to these REACH-like regulations, usually you tend to take or investigate if there are similar type of regulations in place. And I think it has not escaped anyone that Ukraine wants to join the EU, and thus is harmonizing its legislation with the EU, meaning that harmonizing also these chemical regulations, meaning taking elements of EU REACH and implementing those under Ukraine REACH. So I mean, awareness is good for those who are dealing in this, and probably not so good with those who are traditionally not having had to deal with this. So, and of course, with Ukrainian companies themselves, I think it's a very broad spectrum. Do you have, Olesia, any insight on this? Well, how Ukrainian-based companies are aware of Ukraine REACH and so forth?
It really depends also for Ukraine. I mean, in Ukraine, companies that deal with international partners or are subsidiaries of international companies, obviously they, in most cases, are aware. And whenever previous ministry, previous authority was organizing some sort of calls with the industry, you could see the subsidiaries of different foreign companies, I mean, Ukrainian subsidiaries present at the call. But the more localized companies that deal on local market or maybe somewhere else, but not in the EU, the awareness is much worse. So I would assume that it can become a real problem for the local companies that are specialized in the local market, unfortunately.
Very good, thank you. How can a company update its pre-registration after changes in company details? Can an OR submit CLP notifications for the importer, and how should the importer's role be shown in if the OR signs the CLP notification form electronically? So we discussed this second part, this group notification, but if you want to, Olesia, do you want to elaborate on this pre-registration part? If there are changes needed, what does that entail?
Well, it has to be still verified with the authority, but as far as we understand, you submit another pre-registration, and then you inform the authority that this one supersedes the previous one and explain the change. But this process is not fully set up. So again, trial and error type of work. Yeah,
indeed. And I got a comment from someone, please mute your mic when not speaking. So we'll try to do that, Olesia and me. Thank you for the heads up. So indeed, What is the process for as someone who has no prior experience in EU REACH pre-registration and transitional periods for data generation, lead registration, assignment, formation of CEFs and joint submissions? This is a very complicated topic, and as we've already alluded to, not something that is very current for Ukraine REACH at the moment. Data generation is, of course, something that you likely will not have to do because data is available eventually from EU REACH, for example, to be used under Ukraine REACH for registration purposes later on. I touched upon the lead registration assignment, assigning the lead, so nominating a lead and selecting a lead briefly. This process is to be determined in more detail later on. I expect it to be somewhat similar to what we had under EU REACH, and you have a majority who needs to agree on selecting a lead registrant, and then the lead takes it forward and forms a CEF, meaning when a substance identity has been confirmed, it becomes a CEF from a pre-CEF, and then when you submit your lead dossier, depending on the technical solution, either you create your joint submission before that technically, but it becomes real, if you will, joint submission once the lead has submitted their dossier and it has been accepted by the authorities. But indeed, please, the next question also would like to learn more about more details regarding the registration process. Please have a look at these earlier webinars, which you will find on our REACHLaw Talks YouTube channel. So, for example, like we had last year, late last year and earlier last year on navigating Ukraine REACH and Ukraine REACH implications according to the role in the supply chain. There, some of the deadlines for registrations are not entirely correct, but the basics are the same. So I invite you to have a look at those. They're freely available on our YouTube channel, and go and have a look at those for more details, because we need to move ahead. It's we're coming up top of the hour, and we will go over time, as mentioned already. Okay, then question number 21. How does Ukraine REACH regulate device-generated solutions? So in situ generation with and without precursors. So this is dealt with the same way as under EU REACH. So if your in situ generation of a substance is not in itself intended to be separately placed on the market, under certain conditions, it would also be exempt from the registration requirement. But the precursors typically require then a registration. So to keep this very short, and the one who submitted this question, if you want to go into more details, we probably would have to ask you a bit more background to be able to give you more detailed answers. But to put it shortly, the same requirements apply that under EU REACH. And if these are medical devices, then they're generally exempt completely. Wasn't that so, Olesia?
Yes.
If these are, yeah, indeed. Very good. So going to the next question, is anything known already about the Ukraine REACH registration process? Do the authorities have a plan if the EU lead is not interested in Ukraine and hence will not register, or will that become a problem of the registrant? So I can take this. We already talked, and Olesia alluded to this earlier, but and covered this. So indeed, the registration process is still up in the air. There will be obviously some submission portal based on IUCLID, like the sections, whether that will be in English or Ukrainian, probably Ukrainian translated. Will it be like a Turkey type of a KKS system that is, you have essentially the engine is an IUCLID, but you build a front end on top of it that is in Turkish language, or in this case would be Ukrainian language. We'll see how that will work. But the generic issue of if you don't find a lead, I mean, the EU REACH lead registrant does not have to become the lead registrant under Ukraine. It can be anyone. You just need to have access, buy access to the data that is required in this lead dossier so that you can prepare your own lead registration and then accept members to the joint submission. And that then involves checking whether you have sub-licensing rights to the data that you are buying from an EU lead registrant, for example, or a consortium, stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, it will likely be the same issues as we are seeing now in Turkey for those of you who are working with Turkey KKDI cases. But it is not a problem if the EU lead does not want to register Ukraine, generally speaking. But this is indeed, we're very early on this, so we'll have to come back to this as time goes by. We learn more about technical details on this. So indeed, follow us on our newsletter and so forth, or LinkedIn, etc. What about polymer registration? So we covered this in the table just a while ago. So indeed, polymers do not need to be registered. It is the monomers thereof. And this question number 25 ties into this. So here they say that we export polymers over 1,000 tons annually to Ukraine, which are not CMRs. However, one of the monomers used to manufacture the polymer is classified as a CMR. Considering the monomer is not exported to Ukraine, but only the polymers, which is our registration deadline. So it would be the first registration deadline in this case because the substance, the monomer, is classified as a CMR. So you would have this 1st of October 2028, regardless of whether polymer that is indeed placed on the Ukrainian market is not classified. So that is the way it works here under Ukraine REACH, and the same applies also, for example, in Turkey. So that is clear. For CLP notifications, then it's a bit different because there we are notifying substances that are placed on the market in Ukraine as such. So there you would not be essentially then CLP notifying the monomers because you're not placing them then yourself as such on the market. But that's a separate topic. If we import a substance into Ukraine, in which cases should we do a CLP notification instead of a pre-registration? Well, I mean, only in cases where a substance is classified and you're at less than 1 ton annually. Then, of course, you would do a CLP notification, but would not have to do a pre-registration. So I think that is pretty clear. But of course, if you exceed the 1 ton threshold or are even close to it, our recommendation is to go ahead and do a pre-registration. Just be on the safe side of that. It's better to have a bit of an insurance policy, if you will, in the scope of substances you are pre-registering than just going with the bare minimum. Gives a bit of cushion and makes you sleep your nights just a bit better, I think. Next one goes to you, Olesia, 27. In case we stop import, do we have to deactivate the pre-registration? Can we reactivate it afterwards?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, because you're submitting the basically the Excel file type of form to the ministry, then there is no automatic way to deactivate or reactivate it. So you need to, of course, track your tonnages. I mean, what your volumes, John, I mean, to be able to report to in case of inspection and show what you have done, I mean, according to your volumes. But the process for deactivation, if you really want to try to deactivate it, I guess you can inform the authority in writing, and then if you want to reactivate it, inform them again, or they might ask you to resubmit the file again. So I mean, this is something that is not fully regulated. Again, sort of trial and error type of process.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. And just to make a note that, of course, if you have pre-registered, it does not force you to eventually register a substance. So, I mean, do you even bother to deactivate the substance? That's the question, I guess. But of course, if you have an OR only representative, then of course it would be a good measure to try to at least deactivate it, and of course terminate those substances in the agreements. Then that would be construed also as deactivation in a way. But interesting question nonetheless, and thank you for that. So going forward, we submitted a pre-registration request in October 25, but we have not yet received any response from the authorities. Have you experienced the same situations? Do you know what could be causing the delay? And this is, Olesia, you already touched upon this, but if you want to reiterate quickly, go ahead.
Yes, so you haven't received the response from the authority. It's likely because you have submitted during the transitional period from one ministry to another one. As I can see, it was October 2025. So likely that's the reason. So it could be that unfortunately your registrations have been lost. So just resubmit them since there is an extension to the deadline. So resubmit them to the new authority and the new email. So not to the member, but to the Ministry of Economy, and you should receive a response according to the timeline that is currently set at the authorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Olesia. Then a bit of a, not fuzzy, but a slightly more holistic question, I guess. We want to know the news about submitting documents to the ministry, rules, deadlines for receiving a response, maintaining registers, access to registers, etc. This it's a bit all over the place, but do you have, Olesia, any comments maybe on this submitting things to ministry and waiting for responses? Maybe you can comment something on this.
Well, I mean, I think we have touched upon those different registers already previously. So there are quite many registers ministry is supposed to maintain, and they are coming, but likely everything related to the registers, inventories, and so on and so forth will come after the initial deadlines for the pre-registration and CNL notifications. When you submit your pre-registrations and CNL notifications, at the moment you can expect certain delays because, as far as I understand, I mean, the transition from one ministry to another has finished, but in practice it's still ongoing, meaning that the new ministry and the team is learning about the whole process. So we don't have any specific recommendations to you, but if you see that something is missing, you're not receiving a response, go ahead and write an official letter to the ministry in Ukrainian language, sign it electronically, and submit to the ministry. It's their official obligation to respond. So that's the best advice here that we could give to you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Thank you, Olesia. Then I would like to know clarity on the new deadlines and status of chemical legislation. I think we touched upon this already, but just to read, the Ukrainian CLP notification deadline is 6th of December this year. Ukraine REACH pre-registration deadline is 26th of January 2027. Registration deadline for CMR substances at 1 ton or more, or substances of very toxic to aquatic organisms, acute and chronic, at 100 tons or more annually, have a registration deadline of 1st of October 2028. Registration of substances at 1,000 tons or more annually, it's 1st of October 29. Then for 100 to 1,000 ton substances, it's 1st of June 2031. And the last one, so 1 to 10, 10 to 100 tons, is 1st of March 2033. So yeah, now I'm regretting not to having this slide or actually in this deck also with the deadlines, but there you have them. How do you see, maybe we can slightly touch upon this. I know the time is a bit, we're going over time. Thank you for your patience on that, but nothing new, I think. Outlook of further steps, requirements, how do you see this developing, Olesia, going forward, the whole Ukraine REACH regulation and CLP, and well, maybe we can focus just on Ukraine REACH, like in the longer run. How maybe it's a difficult question, but.
Yes, from the practical perspective, basically when the registration deadline is over, so 26th of January 2027, in 30 days the authority is supposed to publish the substances that have been pre-registered, the pre-registration numbers, And this is how the sieve formations can start, and this is basically only when sieve formations can start. So from the practical perspective, if we speak about the registration under the Ukraine REACH, we could understand a little bit more after the pre-registration deadline is over. And we need to remember about the joint submission rules that were published by the previous authority that were on the public consultation this summer. So once they are approved, and if they are approved, then we understand practically that the Ukrainian authority is moving towards the registration, because in those rules for joint submission, that was exactly the process for choosing the the lead registrant, notifying the authority about the lead registrant, and etc., etc. So once those are approved, we know that the authority is serious about the registration. But as far as we understand currently from the discussions ongoing in the industry, the discussion between Ukraine and the European Union in terms of membership, the requirement for Ukraine REACH and CLP is to have at least the inventories for substances on the market in Ukraine, so the pre-registrations, and substances, hazardous substances that are placed in Ukraine in general. So this is the CNL notification type of inventory. So these two are the minimum so-called compliance package that Ukraine needs to have to be able to proceed further in the discussions with the European Union in terms of the Ukraine REACH and CLP implementation. Is the registration required to be implemented fully for Ukraine to become a member of the European Union? The answer is no. So therefore, it's yet to be seen whether the registration will proceed further, and we will need to know about this actually already in 2027, because we have our first deadline on 2028. So therefore, let's first focus on the Ukraine registration and CNL notification, and then again ask authority intensively about the next steps for the registration, because the planning has to start as soon as the registration deadline is over. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Olesia. Deadlines again. Actually, while you were talking, I was able to make an additional slide, so I will show you that in the next slide. How to contact the lead registration consortium? Is there a platform? So no, as mentioned already, there is nothing yet. So whenever that will be available, likely it will be some type of same system that you will have some sort of online system where you can see the lead registrant, and other than that, contacting them will be by email or other means, probably not directly in the system per se, but you will likely find the lead registrant contact details there. But as said, it's very early on. We'll see how that pans out. A question here. Is there anywhere available the CLP attachment with inventory of chemical names in Ukrainian? So do we have this Annex 4, for example, in Ukrainian language in the CLP regulation, Ukraine CLP? Olesia.
Well, at least the harmonized classifications, of course, everything is in Ukrainian, yeah, so you can search the annexes of the CLP regulation for the name.
Yeah, indeed. And then there are some online services where you can also find other chemical names in Ukrainian language. So those are also available. If you do a bit of Googling, you will likely find it. So indeed, the question was, first was, what are the different deadlines? We've had that few times. I will show you now in the next page. And then where do you find the legislation, the page after that one. So indeed, here I just was able to create this page quickly, so you will find it here. The updated deadlines, as already mentioned several times, so you can take a screenshot here if you want to. So indeed, links to the legal text. Again, have your screenshot finger ready, because here you can find the legal text to Ukraine REACH, Ukraine CLP, and Ukraine Law on Chemical Safety, the legal text in Ukrainian language under these different URLs. So just take a screenshot and you can navigate yourself there. And just notice that this is a Cyrillic character. So if you're wondering. Good. We'll put the foot on the accelerator a bit. Do the authorities give any feedback on the received CLP notifications? How can we get the confirmation that CLP notifications submitted by our company in November 25 were accepted by the authorities? And this, Olesia, you already touched upon this, so there's no other way of seeing that everything is okay, except that you get the response email saying essentially that we have received your submission, but you will not get any like CLP notification numbers, etc. That's just an acknowledgement email to your submission. But if you have not received that, then as Olesia suggested, just to go ahead and resubmit those applications. We manufacture rubber compounds. We need to confirm if we need to have the substances within the rubber mixture to be Ukraine REACH registered or not. So likely yes, if they are within the scope of the registration requirements. So all substances as part of a mixture that are not specifically exempt would require this registration, pre-registration to begin with, later on registration at 1 ton or more on the Ukrainian market. So if you want to, for example, this person asking if you want to have a specific answer, I just recommend reaching out to REACHLaw and we can help you figure out the scope if you want. And question number 37, I'm curious to learn on the simplified registration model, which is under discussion, how this will look like and what data will be relevant, that data sharing, use rights. And indeed, this we've covered in previous webinars, so I invite you to have a look at those. I showed you in just a previous, in a few slides ago, I showed a few webinar recordings that are available on our REACHLaw Talks on our YouTube channel. So I invite you to have a look at that, because at the moment we don't know anything more than that. And indeed, the problem with this simplified registration is that you can just refer to data in the simplified registration without having the appropriate use rights to use that data for Ukraine REACH purposes. So indeed, this use rights question is a big thing, will be a big thing if this simplified registration procedure even sees the light of day. So indeed, this is something that is in flux, in development, something that we will absolutely get back to you later on. Who knows why it's called simplified registration, because it doesn't appear very simple, but nonetheless, we'll come back to this. But if you want to know all that we know at this moment, then I recommend you just have a look at our previous webinars on Ukraine REACH, where we touched upon this. Olesia, is there something you want to add to that?
Just very briefly, if the authority would want to really simplify the process for substances that have been registered in the European Union, but the same companies that want to register in Ukraine, they would need to make changes to Ukraine REACH regulation. So at the moment, simplification is not actual simplification, just basically 50% discount on the fee for the authority, and even more work in terms of the dossier formation. So, but it's to be seen if they are going to go for it. It is possible that it will be simplified, but the change to the regulation is required then. Thank you,
Olesia. Last question to you before we have a few questions on law, chemical safety. So, was the ministry transfer, or did it go smoothly? And then IT tools, we discussed that. How are the CIFs going to be formed? We discussed that already, but if you want to comment on the ministry transfer from MEPER to this Ministry of Economy, please go ahead. If not, we can just go to the next one. But yeah, go ahead.
Yes, We are not aware of the details of the transfer in general, but as you have experienced, some of the participants here, you have experienced yourself that some of the registrations and CNL notifications were unanswered, so likely lost. I would say that it didn't go very smoothly, but that's the only information that we know. So not so smoothly, I would assume. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. When does it go smoothly? That's I think the question. Anywhere for that matter. Okay, last questions. Last 5 questions on the law of chemical safety. A bit of redundancy here, and indeed, I have a few slides here. I'll toggle back and forth, but I also invite you to have a look at this specific webinar we had around a year ago, where we went into more details on this. So have a look at that. It's available on REACHLaw Talks on our YouTube channel, so you will find more details. But let's go through these questions, shoot them down quickly one by one. So, Olesia, what is Ukraine a law on chemical safety toxic chemicals permit? What is it? And I can actually help you with that by showing this one.
It means that you need a special permit if you are manufacturing or using substances that fall under the either of the categories specified in the Article 259 of the Ukraine REACH. So these are acute toxicity, category 1, 2, and 3, specific target organ toxicity, single exposure, and repeated exposure, both categories 1 and 2. So either of these chemicals are considered toxic according to the Ukraine REACH, and according to the Ukraine law on chemical safety, they require a permit, so toxic chemicals permit, if manufactured or used on the territory of Ukraine. And then later on, if you read the legislation also, then they speak about importers. So basically, it also likely applies if you import those chemicals. You don't use them, but you import them. Yes, that was briefly.
Very good. Yes, thank you. I'll jump back. What is the procedure for notifying toxic substances? Well, you already touched upon it, but I have another slide also on that. When is it applicable and what must be done? Is there a deadline for the permit submission? So you touched upon this already, but maybe you can elaborate a bit on the deadline and this. Just to...
Yes. So basically, the deadline is now. I mean, it has already passed. So because the procedure itself is specified in the law on chemical safety, and as you remember, it's in force since 2024. However, there was no form for submitting the dossier for the toxic chemical until it was approved, if I remember correctly, in March last year. So basically, we have a form, we have a requirement. So the only thing left for us is to submit the application, and the application should contain the substance information. You can see what kind of information on the slide, information on the uses of the substance, the chemical safety report. But please remember that according to the law on chemical safety, the chemical safety report is required only for chemicals at 10 tons or more, for toxic chemicals also. Then you need to submit details on the implemented risk management measure for safe use. And here comes the problematic area, the liability insurance information, basically covering potential harm to environment and life, health, and property of third parties from use of these toxic chemicals. And here comes the problem that you need to submit this information on the insurance, basically that you are insured. However, there is no such insurance at the moment according to the legislation of Ukraine. Therefore, you have the requirement that you need to submit the toxic chemicals permit. You have a form for submission, and the problem is the liability insurance. Therefore, until this is verified, likely if you submit the toxic chemicals permit application form, it will be rejected because you don't have the liability, the necessary insurance in place. And to apply for the permit, you need to pay the permit fee. This is the authority fee. It's calculated based on the subsistence minimum, as we discussed, multiplied by different applicable coefficients. So we have provided, for example, a permit for over 10 substances, over 100 tons tonnage band, more than 3 uses, and it would cost you approximately 3,000 euro based on the subsistence minimum. That the problem here is that it's only valid for 3 years, and once you submit the application, the authority needs to either reject or grant you the permit within the 30 days from submission. So again, this is a little bit of a similar problem to the PCN notification, because we have a requirement, but and in this case we actually even have a procedure, but there are problems with this specific insurance that we need. Another issue here would be the chemical safety report, because you need to have the rights that you need to actually acquire from the data owner to use any information in the chemical safety report for your toxic chemicals permit. But I guess this is a solvable problem. But the liability insurance is at the moment unsolvable problem, because there is no such insurance. And also it's unclear if only representative would be submitted the toxic chemicals permit who doesn't manufacture, use, or even import the toxic chemical, what kind of liability insurance that only representative could purchase. So as soon as we figure out the insurance question, and we are working on this at the moment, we will let you know, and we will have, I guess, a separate webinar on toxic chemicals permit.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'll just, I will not toggle back to the questions, because I will shoot them here quickly, just because you've already actually answered most of these. I'll just take some parts of those questions quickly. And one was, could this be done with a pre-registration, or is it a separate process? And indeed, it's a separate, completely separate process from Ukraine REACH pre-registration. And then a separate question was that, can it be completed by our only representative in Ukraine on behalf of our local distributors and customers? So Olesia, this goes to you.
Yes, very likely. Well, how the law on chemical safety is written, it's not forbidden at all. So yes, it can be done. But again, the question in this specific case comes to this liability insurance that's required. And something that I forgot to mention, I don't remember if it's in the questions. There is no threshold for the requirement for the toxic chemicals permit. So any amount of the substance that is classified as toxic, and you remember it, Article 259, you need the permit.
Indeed. No, it wasn't there in the questions, but good to mention that indeed there's no threshold for that. So no 1 tons. It's just if you have it and place it on the Ukrainian, it's used on the Ukrainian market, then it applies. So actually that covers the pre-submitted questions. I just took the bits that were not clearly answered before. So we'll take just a few ones from the live questions. I will take them here. Give me just a second. So for example, if one company did a pre-registration and after this needed to change the legal entity, how should we proceed? And I would my intuition would be to just resubmit the pre-registration under the other legal entity, or how do you see this, Olesia? Do we need to specifically inform anything to the authorities, or would it be a good measure to inform them of this?
I think resubmit with the new information, and then yes, inform the authority and check with them what has to be done. But remember that informing the authority in Ukraine means writing an official letter to the official email and sign this email electronically. That would be an official request, and you would get an official response. Yes,
very good. And a question about substance and natural origin should be pre-registered, registered. So indeed, these are the same exemptions as we have under EU REACH. So you can look at Annex 5, for example, of the EU REACH regulation. You will see these exemptions, for example, for substances occurring in nature that have not been chemically modified. Those are exempt from the registration requirement. Also, under Ukraine REACH. Let's see if I can take one final quick one here. Let's see, is this also applicable in case the substance is present in a mixture? Mixture is important. Maybe this is a question on the toxic chemicals permit. So the question is, does this also apply if imported products are imported as mixtures containing these toxic substances? Are there any thresholds? So thresholds, there were no thresholds, but how do we deal with these in mixtures? Olesia.
The toxic chemicals permit is required for substances placed on their own or in mixtures. So even if you have a mixture where you would have a insignificant amount of a toxic chemical, and it doesn't even make your mixture classified as toxic according to the article 259. I mean, it doesn't have that classification, but you have that chemical in your mixture, you have to have a toxic chemicals permit. Another question, of course, who would know that you have such chemical in your mixture if it's not even in the safety data sheet? That's another question. But legally and technically, if you have such chemical in your mixture, you need to have a permit. That's how the law is currently interpreted.
Very good. Thank you, Olesia. And considering we are just half an hour over time as per usual, we'll just stop here with the questions. So indeed, we're here to help. So feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to provide you with quotations and offers for Ukraine REACH, CLP, and even law chemicals safety related services. So feel free to reach out to us, to Olesia or myself, or you can just drop an email to sales@reachlaw.fi and we'll pick it up from there. And indeed, here you will find our contact details, so Olesia and myself, and you can of course find them also on our webpage. And indeed, please, if you have not already done so, subscribe to our newsletter, because then you will get the latest information when there are developments, not just on Ukraine REACH, but on all the REACHes and REACH-like chemical regulations and more that we are covering and working on at REACHLaw. So that being said, thank you, Olesia, very much for your contribution to this, and of course the team in Helsinki, the back office, and of course the biggest thanks goes to you, the attendees who registered and submitted questions to this for this webinar. So thank you very much, and thank you very much for those of you who attended to the end. You are true heroes of the compliance world, if you will. So with that said, thank you very much, and I wish you all a great day, and we'll see you again in our next webinar. So thank you and goodbye.
Bye.